Well, I am 42 years old, and I am from the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. I grew up here, and the area I live in is near Lake Norman. This used to be all farmland, although it's grown up now, but we used to farm over 200 acres, and we grew our own fruits and vegetables. We killed our own. We had hogs and chickens and beef cattle. My dad and my cousins and uncles, they're all great big hunters and fishermen, so I was taught how to shoot and hunt at a really early age. So I know my way around the woods pretty good, and I pretty much know what kind of animals are around these parts. For me, it's important that people realize that, because even though I'm a woman, I do spend quite a bit of time outside, and I always have. So what happened to me in my encounter was definitely not a case of mistaken identity. I'm also part Cherokee on my father's side, the eastern band of the Cherokee tribe. So I've grown up with a whole lot of the native ways and customs.
Because of that, do you have access to elders you could have bounced what happened to you off of to get their take on what happened that night?
Yes, I did, but growing up, my dad, I wasn't raised on the reservation or anything. In fact, he always kind of separated us from that, but he really did not like me hearing the stories. I think for him it was a protection thing. He just wanted to protect me because I'm an only child, and I think he thought it would scare me. So I really didn't ever get to talk to anybody about it, but I used to sit around and listen to my granddad when nobody was watching, or if they didn't know, and I was listening in on some of the things they used to talk about. So I've always heard stories of skinwalkers, wendigos, shapeshifters, Sasquatch, and numerous other things that some Native Americans believe. But it was never something that my dad wanted me, I guess, just being told by people.
Ah, that makes sense. You had a particularly bad encounter with the dog man. After having that encounter, how has knowing that monsters are real changed your life?
Oh, gosh. That's just it. When I had my encounter, I was 14 years old, and even though I was young, I was very mature for my age. When you realize that everything you've been taught to believe is not true, you begin to question everything. You've been told, don't worry about it, it can't hurt you, like, well, werewolves and vampires and numerous other things we were all told won't bother us or hurt us. You start to wonder just how much of that is a lie and how many other, quote, monsters are out there. Although, back then, I do believe, at especially my young age, what I saw, I felt was a monster. Now that I'm older, I feel like it was just an animal, but still, it's just very hard, even as an adult, it's so hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that these things are walking around. And for me, I think they're very dangerous. So I'm hoping your listeners will listen to my story with a grain of salt, and if anything else, just remember that these things, in my opinion, are very predatory, and please don't go out looking for them. Just leave them be.
Yeah, I wish more people would listen to that advice. After what you and Jill went through that night, I don't see how anyone could blame you for looking at these things as being monsters. That was just a horrible encounter you two had. No one should ever have to live with something like that.
Yeah, it was very bad, and it's manifested in a lot of different ways throughout my life, from nightmares to, if I hear a bump at night, I tend to turn all the house lights on outside, or sometimes even inside if I'm not real sure. I've always had big dogs. It just affects you, and it comes out in a lot of different ways. I always carry a gun, always have, always will, even though I don't think a gun would really deter one of these things very much. But I was raised a survivalist too, so I always watch my surroundings anyway, but my paranoia level is probably a few degrees higher than most people, let's say. And I hate when people say I'm paranoid, but I guess in some ways I am, but for me it's just a self-protection thing. And I always tell people, I'm not afraid of the dark. I'm afraid of what is in the dark.
Oh, that makes good sense. After the listeners have a chance to listen in and hear what happened to you that night, I don't think anyone's going to not be able to understand why you would be paranoid. And also, after what you two lived through that night, I'm just astonished that you can go to bed every night without looking under that bed just to make sure there's not something underneath there.
Oh, trust me, I have looked underneath the bed and in the closet several times throughout my life. Although I think it's actually too big to fit underneath your bed. But it does. It changes you in a lot of ways. For me, I have a lot of horrible nightmares to the point that I've had to have sleeping medication. I don't sleep well even to this day. I'm very thankful that I found your show to listen to because it makes you feel not so alone. But I'm not going to lie. There's several stories on your show that have scared the crap out of me, especially one in particular. But, yeah, I mean, it just, when you go through this, especially when I went through it and there was no internet, no nothing, but even with the internet, it's just hard to find people like you that you can talk to about this. And, I'm glad you do have your show, and if anything, to warn people and to give people like me a place to talk about our experiences to where we don't feel like we're so alone anymore.
Oh, I'm so glad you did find out about the show and consequently about me. You mentioned the nightmares there, Danielle. What do they normally consist of?
For me, usually werewolves or bears. I have a few things in this, I don't know, I guess I've always been afraid that might happen to me or one of my children, and it's usually nightmares about one of these things getting my children or a bear getting my children. They say sometimes things that you're afraid of the most come out in dreams, and I guess because my fear is always being attacked by a bear or drowning or meeting up with one of these creatures again, that's what comes out when I sleep. So I had many sleepless nights, especially here lately, because I'm terrible to haven't listened to every episode yet of your show, but I tend to listen to them at night, and then it makes it even harder for me to sleep.
Oh, no.
I enjoy listening to them, though. I do.
You mentioned just a bit ago that there's one episode in particular that really stands out as being the most creepy. Which episode is that?
Oh, no, I don't think it's creepy. For me, it was terrifying, and that was Kat's story, which, if she's listening, hi, I don't know how you lived through that, but God bless you. But, yeah, her story scared me to death, and I think it's the factor that it chased them. I was trapped, but she was chased, and I've always had an issue with anything chasing me or crawling on the ground. To me, crawling on the ground's creepy. But being chased by one of these things, oh my God, even though she was fairly young herself when it happened, I don't know how she lived through it. I really don't. And just listening to her story, I could hear, even all these years later, all the fear and terror in her voice. And I was just in tears listening to her story because you could just tell that it's really, really affected her.
Oh, it was a bad encounter that she had. Kat has helped so many people after having that encounter and continues to help people to this day. In 2008, you started writing books about dogmen. Why did you do that?
To help me deal with this and cope with it, because I've never really coped with it or dealt with it. At the time of my encounter, my mother was very sick and dying with cancer. Like I said, I'm an only child, so this kind of got, I'm not going to say suppressed, but kind of pushed away for many, many years. And it was my ex-husband who would see that I hear something and turn all the lights on, or the fact that I have to carry a gun on me at all times. And I haven't told too many people my story, but I did tell him, and, I trusted him. He was like, you write beautifully. I love to write. And he was like, you just need to write about it. And I didn't really want to write about my encounter. In fact, when I wrote you was the first time I ever put into words my encounter. But I started writing, and I'm still trying to write it. It's a book, but in the book, I kind of flip it, because in the book, it's just fictional book, but I named her Lyrica, and she's a werewolf, but she's a natural-born werewolf in my book, and she doesn't really know what she is. But in my book, she can be a wolf, a human, or what I call the beast. And, of course, the beast is basically what I saw that night of my encounter, the true story. But nothing really in the book is true, of course, at all. But it does help me deal with it. And I guess it's weird because in my book, Lyrica, even though she is a werewolf, she hates werewolves and she tracks them and she kills them, which makes her very hated in the, I guess, werewolf community. But I guess it's weird because I kind of make her a hero in the book. I don't know if I could ever get it written out and I want to turn it into a series. I think it'd be really, really good because of the way I've got it kind of laid out and planned out and how she discovers what she is along the way. And for her, because she's natural born, she was born a werewolf, she can actually control the beast, but she doesn't know that yet. If I can ever get it all written out, the first few books, she just thinks she's a monster. So she lives with a whole lot of, disliking herself because she believes she's a monster too, even though she'll later on find out that she's not, or not the type of monster she thinks she is. But I love to write, and it has helped me deal with it some. So hopefully, maybe someday, you never know, you might see where there's a book about a werewolf named Lyrica. That would be mine.
Well, I sure hope you let me know when that book is published, because I want to get my hands on a copy of it and have a chance to read it. It sounds really good to me. And talking about this book, I was surprised to find out that you actually decided in '08 to start writing books about this topic. I thought you would have too hard of a time doing that, but like you just mentioned, I'm sure it is great therapy when you do so.
It seems like some of your readers are like me too. Either you kind of get obsessed with it or you're terrified of it. For me, I went the obsession route. And anything I can get my hands on as far as werewolves and the supernatural, I wanted to watch. For me, all the movies have it wrong, at least until Van Helsing come out. The black creature towards the end of the movie, I guess that's what he turns into. That kind of looked like what I saw, except the teeth weren't quite that big and the nose was a little different. But you just look for something that's kind of like what you saw, because even though what I saw when I recount it scares me to death, it wasn't, quote, I don't know, Hollywood usually makes them look very monstrous. It still looked like an animal to me. But then again, yeah, it is a monster. Because, I mean, when you see one, you're just, I don't know how to describe it, Vic. It's something I wouldn't wish upon anybody, because it's something, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And you don't ever forget it.
A normal animal, it wouldn't have done the things that that dog man did that night. Having said that, are you kind of jealous of the eyewitnesses who have encounters nowadays, looking at the fact that they can go on the internet and research these things and instantly find out information about what they saw? Are you jealous at all in that regard?
No, I'm not jealous. I'm thankful, because like I said, this is hard to deal with, period. It's not like we can even go to seek help. I mean, I know I've had anger problems and I have sleep problems, but this isn't something you can tell your doctor about without getting locked up or institutionalized. So I'm glad that the internet is there for people to find shows like yours and to find other people they can connect with. But it's still, I believe, very hard, even with the internet, to get people to talk about this. As you yourself know, this is still one of those topics that people laugh at and ridicule and just don't believe you still, even with people coming forward saying, no, I've seen it, no, it's happened. I mean, it's hard still, even with the internet. It's hard for all of us.
Back when that happened to you and Jill, though, without the internet around, I'm sure for some time you were convinced that you two were the only two people who had to live through something like that, though, didn't you?
Well, I don't think I was convinced that I was the only person that went through it. I mean, I've never been naive to think I'm the only person that's ever gone through something like that. It was just I didn't know how to find anyone who would ever admit that they had gone through something like that, if they had. It was just being able to make those connections with people like me. I didn't know how to do that. because even though there were people there that night, we actually only talked about it once, and we never spoke of it again. And since then, I've lost touch with the other 3 people that it involved. So it's been quite the lonely existence for me. And like I said, I didn't really start dealing with it until '08. So that's about 20 years of not telling anyone. That's a long time.
That is a long time to go without dealing with it. I am glad that you eventually did confront it and start to deal with it.
I am too, because like I said, I still have problems with it, and I always will. Because, as I said, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. I know there's listeners out there that want to actually seek out these things. If I can just say, please don't do that. 1, these things are truly dangerous, in my opinion. And 2, we're not all lucky. I know a lot of the people on your show, people like me, we come on there and we talk about this, and it seems like we got away with it unscathed, but we didn't. We all have nightmares. This causes problems for all of us. I have a lot of panic attacks and anxiety, and I'm sure a whole lot of other people out there that went through this have that too. Don't go poking a stick at a tiger, and in this case it's not even a tiger, it's something much, much worse, because I have a feeling that there are probably people who have encountered this thing and we'll never hear their story, because I don't think they walked away from it. So please don't go out there looking for this thing. Please.
It's easy to think that everyone gets away from these things unscathed. That is definitely not the case. It's easy to think that, but that's not how it is. There are people who have been attacked by these things, and I've said this before. Moving on, you never did tell your mom about the encounter you had. Why was that?
Well, I think I would have if circumstances had been different and maybe she had lived, although it had been years later. But at the time, there was just too much going on. My encounter happened in September, October of '97. I can't quite remember. It was either right at the end of September or the beginning of October. But in November of '87, my mother found out that she had a year to live. So for me, there's too much going on in our family, and it was just not the appropriate time to tell my mother something like that.
Oh, I can understand. Had she lived, do you think you ever would have told her about what happened?
Yeah, I think I would have, eventually. I would have told her, because I think she would have believed me.
Yeah, it does sound like you two had a really good relationship there, so I'm not surprised that you think that she would have believed you. I'll bet you she would have. All right, Danielle, let's get into the details of this encounter. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, Vic, I'll do my best. Like I said, this happened in September or October of 1987. Around here, there was a lot of farmland, so we had a lot of woods. I had a boyfriend who was 16 years old. So I was still 14. He could come to my house and hang out, but I wasn't allowed to, quote, car date, as my mother called it. So at around midnight, I snuck out of the house, which is a very bad thing to do, I know. But I snuck out of the house, I met him, and we went to pick up one of my good friends, Jill, and then we went to get Jill's boyfriend. Jill's boyfriend lived down a very long road. It was a long dirt road. In fact, there was a lot of dirt roads around here at that time. Because my boyfriend had a '69 Camaro, it was very loud. So he decided to park it at the end of his dirt road, and he would just walk down and get him. So we proceeded to park the car. And I don't think it was a full moon night, but there was enough moonlight that night that he didn't even take a flashlight because it was lit up enough just by the moon that he could see. So he got out of the car, and he left us sitting in the car with the radio playing while he went to retrieve her boyfriend. Well, he hadn't been gone very long. I guess it had been probably 10 minutes. And I was sitting there, and I was talking to Jill. And the first thing I noticed was that there was this horrible, horrible smell. And when I say it was horrible, I mean it was the most god-awful stench that I have ever in my life encountered. It smelled like rotten meat, like once, I guess, maggots had set in. And then it had this really musky, pungent odor. Closest I can come to describing it would be it's the smell a boar hog kind of puts off. There was a smell of wet dog, and then the most disturbing of the smells was the smell of blood. And if you've ever been raised like me where you kill your own, you know that smell of blood. It's like a metallic kind of iron smell in the air. But that was the smell that this thing was putting off, and it was extremely, extremely strong. My friend was talking away, and I interrupted her, and I asked her, I was like, do you not smell that? And at first she was like, smell what? And I was like, you don't smell that? And she took a good whiff, and then she was like, ooh, yes, what is that? And I said, I don't know, but I don't remember smelling that when we pulled up. And she was like, well, it had to have been here, but you would have thought if we had noticed that when we first pulled up, I would have never let him park there. But she convinced me that, okay, maybe the smell had been there and it just hadn't gotten to us yet. So she went about talking, and it was so bad, though, we had to take our shirts and pull them up over our nose and, smell the inside of our shirts because they smelled like perfume. Well, it probably wasn't just a few minutes later, I don't even think it was 5 minutes, but there was a subtle nudge of the car from the back. It just felt like somebody kind of gently rocked the car. Well, we both felt it, and Jill shut up, and she was like, what was that? And I didn't know what it was either, and it kind of scared me, and it scared her too, and I was like, I don't know. And then it dawned on me, at this point, it had almost been 15 minutes, so if our boyfriends had run, they could easily be back by now. And I just kind of smiled at her, and I said, it's probably the guys, I whispered, it's probably the guys trying to scare us. And she was like, well, let's just ignore it, and, we'll just act like we didn't even feel it. So that's what we did. She went back to talking, and I need to let the listeners know that we had been in the car long enough that, and talking, the windows had all fogged up from us talking, so we couldn't really see out of them because they were so foggy. Well, it was just a minute later, and there was another kind of rock of the car. We just kept talking and ignored it. But then the car got shook really forcefully. This time we kind of laughed and we yelled out to the guys that it wasn't going to work. We knew it was them and they weren't going to scare us and that they just needed to stop and come on. Well, there was no reply. And then there was another shake of the car. Again, pretty forceful. I told them, cut it out, come on. And at this point, Jill was saying, come on too, wasn't gonna work. And we even yelled their names, but there was no reply. Well, the next time the car shook, it came from the front, and this time it was downright violent. I remember Jill and I, at that point, we both kind of quit smiling because it was shook hard enough that I thought, I'm not so sure my boyfriend would do something like that to his car. And at that point, we started trying to look out the windows. And like I said, this car was an older Camaro, and he had just put a lot of money into it. I know it sounds silly, but I didn't even want to take my hand and wipe the fog away from the windows because I knew he would fuss at me for getting fingerprints all over it. So we were just kind of straining, trying to see out of the windows. But we really couldn't see anything. This time, we yelled at them again, okay, it's not funny. They've scared us, ha ha. Get in the car, let's go. Because we were still thinking at this point that it was our boyfriend. Well, they didn't answer us. Like I said, that was beginning to really scare us. So I cut the radio down to see if we could really hear anything, like hearing them laugh or anything, but we didn't hear anything. And again, there was another violent shake, and we screamed again for them to stop. They were scaring us to cut it out. Well, then we kind of said, guys, and when we said that, that's when we heard this very low, deep, guttural kind of growl. And it sounded like some type of dog or something. It scared the crap out of both of us because it just sounded so sinister and evil-like. And it was the type of growl that kind of resonates in your chest and it sends cold chills up and down your spine. And I remember the hair on the back of my neck started to stand, and I was really freaked out by it, and so was Jill. Sorry, I start to get really nervous at this point. It didn't really sound like an ordinary growl. I can't, like from an ordinary dog, I guess. I can't really describe it, but there was just something really troubling about that growl. I was like, what in the was that? I remember I looked back at my friend and all the blood had drained from her face. And she just looked like she was terrified. And then the next thing we heard, it sounded like somebody was taking their fingernails and they were actually coming from the front driver's side quarter panel all the way down to the door, just scratching the car. And I don't mean like barely scratching the car. I mean, you could tell that this was very deep because it was really loud. And at that point, I realized this is definitely not my boyfriend or her boyfriend because, one, he would never do that, and he surely would never allow that to be done to his car. And I remember just sitting there and just watching from the inside as this noise come down the car, and when it got to the handle, the driver's side handle, it actually tried to lift it. It tried to lift the door handle. And at this point, I jumped across and just slammed the lock because it wasn't locked. Well, when I did this has now put me literally inches from the glass, maybe 1.5 inches. And although I couldn't really see out of it, I just knew there was something on the other side of that freaking glass. I don't know, I guess everybody says that you know when something's kind of staring at you, and that's how I felt. I felt like there was something on the other side of the glass that, although I could not see it, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was staring at me. And that's when I started to feel very, very scared. And when I say scared, I mean a type of fear that I've never felt before. This was like more of a primal fear. Like your life is in danger. You just know that there's something definitely not right with this situation. And I was just absolutely, totally frozen with fear. I remember thinking, what in the world could this possibly be? Because, like I said, we realized it's not the guys playing a prank on us at this point. So you kind of run through your head what in the world could be on the other side of that door. I thought, well, okay, maybe it's a dog, because it did sound canine. And then I even went to, well, maybe it's a wild boar, because we had wild boar, but they were up in the mountains, and I thought, well, maybe one found its way down here. I didn't know what it was, but with the smell and then that, we knew it was some type of animal that we were dealing with. And I don't know why, but as scared as I was, I just absolutely had to reach up. I wanted to see what was on the other side of the window. Don't know why, but I wanted to see what was on the other side of the window. So, like an idiot, I reached up and I actually just kind of smeared a little spot away from the window. And when I did, on the other side, I saw a nose and a muzzle. And when I did that, the thing snorted and actually left steam on the other side of the glass. And I only saw it for a brief second because then it stood. And when I say it stood, I mean it stood up on its 2 feet. So whatever was on the other side of the door was definitely not what I thought it was. And then at the time, I didn't know if I was seeing things or what was going on. But I could have swore this freaking thing actually stood up. And I remember I was so freaking terrified. I remember it growled when it did that and stood, and then the car started to shake, and I jumped back into my seat. Jill was wanting to know what in the world was on the other side of the glass, and I didn't know what to tell her. And then the car's shaking, and when I say the car's shaking, I mean at this point, this thing has gotten a hold of the car, and it's shaking the car. I mean just back and forth, shaking it and shaking it. Jill's in the back seat. She's screaming and crying. I'm up front. I'm all upset. I don't know what this thing is that's outside of the car. Like I said, the car is shaking. I know in my mind I was thinking, did I just see an animal stand up? And I was thinking, did I see a dog stand up? But that made no sense. And the muzzle had looked like the muzzle of like a German Shepherd or possibly even a wolf. And while it was shaking the car, it was just growling ferociously. I mean, it just sounded horrible. And it was, it was horrible. I was trying to tell Jill to hush and be quiet because it seemed like the more noise we made, the worse it was. The worse the growling was, the worse the shaking was, and I was thinking this whole time, oh my God, this thing is going to bust the glass and it's going to get us. Well, I was sliding down in the front seat, trying to get down in the floorboard as far as I could get. I was trying to tell Jill to get down and to try to get her to hush up. Then all of a sudden, it just quit shaking the car. And we could hear it moving around. We could hear it sniffing at the windows. We heard it step back. And when we heard it step back, you knew it was still on two legs. So that meant this thing is bipedal. We heard it step back, and then we kind of saw it move around to the back of the car. And when I talked to you in the pre-interview, and when I had first contacted you through email, I didn't talk to you about its hands. Well, for me, Vic, that was one of the hardest parts of this night. It's still, when I think about that thing's hands, this thing had hands like a raccoon. It wasn't normal. It wasn't paws. It was hands. Like if you were to take a raccoon's hands and you were to like blow them up like 15 times their size, that's what you were talking about. And when this thing had stood, I was looking at its genitalia and its thighs. So that's meaning this thing is 7 to 8 feet tall. Because even though a Camaro is low to the ground, I mean, they're not that low. And if I'm looking at their thighs and genitalia and it was male, then that means this thing was just huge. And then we could see the silhouette of it, but we couldn't like see it. And that's when we saw its hands, and you could see that by its hands and stuff, it looked like its arms were really long. So, I mean, I'm just guessing because we couldn't see it all the way, but we were looking at basically arms and its hands and like its navel and some of its thighs and stuff. So that means its whole upper body, or most of its upper body, was still up in the air. Anyway, like I said, the hands really creeped me out. They looked like raccoons. It had claws, not as long as what the movie makes them out to be, but they were pretty long, like a grizzly's claws, I'd say. Which I guess that is pretty long, but I don't know. In the movies, they just make them ridiculously long. Then we heard it come down, so now it's back down on all fours. And then it started messing with the lock. Jill had calmed down a little bit, and thank God, because we could hear it. It sounded like this thing was trying to figure out how to unlock the trunk. And I was thinking, oh my God, this thing is trying to get in here to us. But again, I thought I had seen an animal. And in fact, I thought I'd seen a dog. Okay, what kind of dog walks on two legs and is intelligent enough to try to get in to a trunk? I mean, like they're trying to figure it out, like a human being would, like type of human intelligence. My mind was reeling. I had no idea what we were dealing with. All I know is I was terrified. Well, it was at this point that it also dawned on me that my door was not locked. So as scared as I was, and I was pretty far down in that car in the floorboard, I reached up and I had to lock that door. On those old cars, anytime you lock them, they make a really loud sound. So I was hoping it wouldn't be that loud. But unfortunately, when I clicked it and it engaged, it was really loud. When that happened, it was like the thing quit messing with that lock back there, and you could hear it. It was like he paused, so it was like you knew it, he heard it. And then all of a sudden, he ran, and we could hear him ran on all four around to my side of the car. And it's sniffing. You can hear it on the other side, and it's sniffing at that door. Now, you talk about terrified. Now my fear level goes up even more because now I'm back to dealing with this thing, and it's on my side of the car. And again, I'm within inches of it, even though there's a car between us, and I can hear it smelling around my door. Oh, God.
Hey, it's okay. We'll be right back.
Anyway, now this thing's on the other side of the car door, and it's on my side of the car door, or I don't know how to say that. It was on my side of the car, just outside of my door, and you could hear it sniffing and stuff. And then it quit sniffing, and it pulled at the door. It tried to lift the door handle again. Well, I had scooted around and positioned myself so I could grab the door handle. So I grabbed the door handle. And as soon as I did that, this thing started really, really, like, grabbing the handle on the other side and trying to lift up and lift up and lift up. I mean, you could tell it was like a battle between me and this thing. And it started to growl again, and it was acting really, really ugly. I was holding on to that door with dear life, even though from what I've seen so far, there's no way if it got the door open, I was going to be able to hold the door. But I wasn't just going to let it come into the car either. So I'm holding on to the door, and now things are getting ridiculous again. Jill's screaming and crying, and at this point, I'm starting to get really upset, and I'm beginning to lose it, and this thing's growling, and the smell from it, and I mean, it was just too much, and I was telling Jill to shut up at this point and just be quiet because she was making it worse, but she was just hysterical, and I just lost it. I started screaming and crying myself, and then I started yelling at it to just quit and leave us alone and go away, and Jill started yelling for it to quit and leave us alone and go away. Believe it or not, all of a sudden, everything just quit. Dead silent. It quit pulling at the door, and everything just stopped. We sat there, not even a minute, and Jill was like, "Do you think it's gone?" Even though we hadn't heard it run away, I didn't know if it was gone or not. I was like, "I don't know," because we had been crying, so we couldn't really tell if it ran away. If so, we hadn't heard it. I was like, "I don't know." We were listening for like sniffing or breathing or anything, and we just couldn't hear anything. About another minute passed, and I realized what I was going to have to do is I was going to have to, again, reach up and try to see out the window to see if it had left. And I was really dreading that. I really did not want to look out that window. But I repositioned myself because I was far enough down in the floorboard that you wouldn't have been able to see my body without putting your face up to the glass and looking in and looking down. Well, anyway, I positioned myself, and I remember my hand was really numb from holding onto the door, and I could barely use it. It was almost asleep, but I turned myself, and I just swiped a little place away from the window again, and then I was going to have to peek my head up just to look out that window. Well, I real slowly went up to that little spot and just looked out of it. And when I lifted myself up high enough to look out, to my ultimate horror, I am now looking into the eyes of two of the deadliest eyes I have ever in my life seen. I was looking at a monster. It had yellowish ember eyes. It was huge. It was much bigger than what I thought it was. And I'm not really good at weights or anything, but I think I'd originally told you I thought this thing was 300 or 400 pounds. But when you think muscle mass and the fact that I was thinking this thing was 7 to 8 foot tall, I would bet this thing weighed 600 or more pounds. I'm telling you, its head was the size of a grizzly, and I'm not joking. It was enormous. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. To this day, I find it hard to tell you the fear that run through me, because This thing was not supposed to exist. This was a monster. It had a really kind of like shepherd-like snout. It was dark. It was black. Around its muzzle and its eyes, it was starting to get little pieces of gray, almost like maybe it was aging. It had tall ears, and it had hair coming out, like little tufts of hair coming out from its ears, the inside of its ears, and on the points, almost like you see a bobcat, and they have those long little tufts. Well, that's what was coming out. I was so close to it, Vic, I could see it had scars. It had a scar all the way across its snout, and then it had another scar across its right eye. So I don't know if it got those scars perhaps killing something or perhaps fighting. I don't know. If they do run in packs, maybe it was fighting another pack member. I don't know. But when I say this thing was huge, it was huge. And I mean huge. And it was just looking at me. And you almost felt like it was just looking through you. And I remember I remember in my mind, I was sitting there thinking, no, this can't be real. This is a mythical creature that isn't supposed to exist, something that Hollywood made up. And I was sitting there, and the only word I could find for it in my mind was, I was looking at a werewolf. I was face to face with a werewolf on the other side of the glass. And as you see, I still to this day, when I look back, I just get totally speechless sitting here thinking about that thing and looking at it. I can't wrap my mind. I mean, I know it exists, but it's still, I cannot believe they're out there. And they are. They're real. And I was looking at one. We probably honestly didn't look at each other that long because all of a sudden the animal, it looked down the road, like from where the guys should be coming. And that's when I realized, oh my God, the guys are going to be coming back any minute, and they're out there with this monster. And I realized this thing was probably going to kill my friends, and we were going to have to listen, or worse, watch it kill them, and then it was going to come back for us. And I just lost it again. I started to cry. I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to warn them. There was nothing I could do to help them. And I remember when it did this, I got a really good kind of side view of it when it looked, and it only did it for a quick second, but when it looked down the road and then it snapped its head back at me, it gave me a really nasty kind of growl, and it just showed me its teeth, and it had these huge ivory teeth. I'll never forget that. Just kind of like, it didn't sneer at me, but just like, a warning, like when a dog growls at you, like warning you, like, don't mess with me. That's kind of what it did. But it snapped its head back my way, gave me that growl. I got to see its teeth, and then all of a sudden it just shut off in the other direction. I was floored. I couldn't believe it. It was gone. And when I say this thing was fast, this thing was lightning fast. It was gone in an instant. I only got to see it. It ran off on all fours. I got to see that it kind of, I say the buffalo slump, but I guess most people call it hyena, but it was kind of shaped that way from the side. Its back and neck and shoulders were like, I don't know, built up like a hump almost. I didn't see a tail. I don't think it had a tail that I could tell, but I didn't really get to see the rear end of it really good, but I did get to see there for just a minute, or just a second, really, not even a minute, before it shot off. But it dove off, and it was back in the wood line, and it was gone, and it was probably, I don't know, a minute or less. We heard the guys. We saw flashlight beams. We heard them laughing and talking, and they were back. We were, of course, hysterical. were so scared. In fact, they had to knock on the window, and once they were in the car, I remember locking my door and then jumping across my boyfriend and locking his. And I remember Jill's boyfriend was like, "What's wrong with you? Why are you crying?" And then my boyfriend was looking at me going, "Why are you crying? What happened?" They wanted to know what was happening. And then we all heard this horrible, horrible howl. I can't even describe it to this day, but it was just like when it growled at me the first time. It was just something that I'll never forget. And when we heard that howl, Jill and I were like, just get us the out of here and get us home. And I remember my boyfriend, he kind of bucked me for a minute and was like, "Oh, we're not going nowhere until you tell us what happened." And I remember I reached across him and I was trying to crank the car and I screamed at him that I wanted to leave, that we had to go right now. I said it forceful enough, and I was crying and upset that even though he was mad, he fired the car up and he sped out of there, which I can't tell you how happy I was, because I didn't care if he was mad or not. I was just getting away from that horrible nightmare that we had just encountered. But the guys were pretty mad. We wanted to go home right away. And, of course, they didn't like that idea very much. But we did go home. And I remember when I got home, I had to run across my yard. My yard's really big. And I remember how scared I was. And I remember getting into the house and getting underneath the covers and just shivering and shaking and crying still. I was still upset. And I remember getting up and looking out my window probably a million times that night just for anything in the darkness. I was just so scared. We had tried to tell our boyfriends on the ride home what had happened, but we were so upset. I don't think they really understood half of what we were saying, and they were mad, too. I doubt they were listening much because they were mad that we wanted to go home. But the next day, my boyfriend stopped by. And when he stopped by to show me that on the top of his car in the dust, because, like I said, we'd been on dirt roads that night, in the dust, though, there was handprints where this thing had grabbed right at the roof and window on the front and the back of his car. So that right there tells you just how far-reaching just its arm spread was. And undoubtedly it was grabbing it right there where I thought it was, shaking the car back and forth. And then right down his driver's side in the front, left quarter panel, all the way to the door, was deep, deep claw marks. Not scratches, claw marks. Deep enough that he had to have it repainted. And like I said, we talked about it. They believed us at that point. We talked about it, never talked about it again. Because we later found out, too, the reason it sounds like a long time, but really all of this, him leaving and everything, the whole encounter with the creature was probably 10 to 12 minutes. And he was probably gone 20, 25, and the reason he was gone so long is Kim's boyfriend, they had something bothering their horses and had some cattle killed. And we all agreed that what they thought was killing cattle was not killing the cattle, that it was probably this thing. So that's what happened to me that night. I will never in my life forget it.
Goodness gracious, I can't even imagine what it must have been like to live through something like that.
It was bad. I mean, when I talk about it, it's bad.
Keep in mind, it says a lot about your character, the fact that you're able to function as well as you are functioning today after having to live through an experience like that.
I have my days. I have bad days.
Oh, sure you do. That's only natural. After something like that, you just move on and deal with every day the best you can, and no one could ask more from you. Did you have a chance to get an idea, a rough impression on how wide this thing was?
Well, I know, not really. Well, I'll put it to you this way. Like I said, I only saw that side view of it when it turned to look down the road, and then it was just its head. But as far as body-wise, when it shot away was the only time I saw it that way. Its head filled up that window right there. I mean, it was huge head. I didn't really notice his shoulders because I was so shocked. I was just looking into his eyes, and I was just reeling because I could not believe this thing was real. But I would have bet, I think about his car door, and on those car doors were really long. I would have bet it would have taken up that whole car door. So it had probably been 3.5, 4 foot from shoulder to shoulder, I'd say. It was big. It was enormous.
That is awfully big. When it was at that window and you were face to face, did you ever have a chance to look into its mouth?
The only thing I saw was its gums. I didn't see its tongue or anything because I remember thinking that it had really pink gums, but then it had some black. There was I don't know how to describe it, some black on it too, like black spots almost. And the only thing I can compare it to is a chow, but its lips were black, but then its gums were that pink and black. But I didn't see its tongue. It kept its mouth closed, and when it bared its teeth, that's just what it did. It just pulled its lips back and bared its teeth at me.
Yeah, that's awfully creepy. You said that its hands are what creeped you out the most about this thing's physical qualities, but what is it about this encounter you had that scared you the most? It could be something it did or something else.
The fact that it was intelligent enough to try to pull at the door, because that's what's always bothered me all those years. If it was smart enough to pull at the doors, to this day it bothers me. I'm glad it didn't, don't get me wrong, but I've always questioned, why didn't it just break the glass? And I've always questioned, why did it just run off? Because, it was like the guy spooked it. Because I guess it heard the guys coming back, but I look at it as it could have had all of us as a midnight snack.
I can totally understand how when it tried to open up that door handle, how that would be the scariest aspect of it. When you're talking about how it was trying to lift that door handle, it reminded me of a story. This story I'm going to share with you and the listeners is pretty creepy. It's not nearly as creepy as what happened to you, but tell that to the woman who lived through this. There was a woman who was driving home late one night through the country. She came around a bend and saw this thing, as she described it, in the middle of the road, feeding on some kind of roadkill. Not sure if it was a dead deer or what. As she came around this corner and came to a stop, not very far from it, it stood up, turned around to face her, and that's when she could notice, as it was bipedally standing there in front of her, she noticed that it looked like a werewolf. Well, this werewolf, it started walking towards her car. And as it was walking towards her car, it kind of veered over to the driver's side as it approached, walked up alongside the car. She's sitting there in absolute shock watching this. It reaches out, grabs her door handle, and lifts it. It's trying to get into her car at her. When you're talking about what she went through that night and how it tried to manipulate that door handle on that Camaro, I instantly thought about that story and thought, yeah, I've heard that before.
I know how she feels because you just think the only thing that could be smart enough to do that, you would think, would be a human being.
Yeah, you would think so. That just makes them even more scary when you think that they can do that. Not only do they have the physical tools to dispatch you at the drop of a hat, but if they're smart enough to manipulate door handles like that, where does all this stop? What's their limit?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because trust me, I was a little too up close and personal with the one I encountered, and I don't ever want to be that close to one again. But I definitely got to see the tools he was working with, and they are definitely not anything anyone wants to play with.
Oh, there's no doubt about that. When you're talking about your Native American heritage and what happened that night, I got to wondering, are there any burial grounds in that area?
Well, yeah, all through here. A lot of this land through here was Native American. And at the time around here, because, it wasn't just Cherokee, but there was Catawba Indians around here. A lot of different tribes were in this area. There's a lot of dairy farms and cattle farms. People grew corn and hay, and, this was a huge farming community back then.
As if what you went through wasn't bad enough, you've got something else that you're dealing with currently. Your daughter, you told me, she wants to go out and have an encounter with one of these things herself. Please tell us about that and what that's putting you through.
Yes, I have. My eldest is 22 years old, and her name is Chelsea, and she has heard the stories, and she's heard mine now. She never knew until she was older what happened to me, but ever since she's learned about it and we found your show, she loves to listen. She's a big fan, but she's decided she wants to go see one, and she's picked the worst place possible. She wants to go to Taylor, Mississippi. And it is killing me because I've tried and tried to tell her that this is not something she wants to see. Like I said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. She needs to leave it alone. It's dangerous. This thing is something that could really hurt her, but she just will not listen. And it put me in the position that I'll either let her go alone with her friends and probably get themselves killed, or I go with them and we could still get killed, but I do my best to protect them, you know, and try to keep them safe. But that's the hard part. When they're 22, there's nothing I can do short of chaining her down, and then I'd probably get arrested for that. So, yeah, it's become quite the argument here, because I told her this is not something she wants to see, that she needs to just be happy with the stories and leave it alone. But she's got it in her head that she has to see one.
Ooh, I really hate to hear that. As if what you lived through that night wasn't bad enough for you to have to deal with that now. The fear that she wants to go out there and have an encounter with one of these things. Well, you can't catch a break.
No, it doesn't feel like it, because for me, I don't ever want to see one of these things again. But I'm not going to stand back and let my child get herself killed either. So if it means I have to go with her, all I can do is pray that she doesn't see one, and that if she does, we get to walk away again. But like I said, Vic, I know there's people out there that have not walked away from this. I know there is. I just know there is. Well, I guess they're not out there anymore, but you know what I mean. I'm very upset about this. I hate that I've been put in this position.
Chelsea, since you like to listen to the show, I sure hope you do listen to reason. I know more than one person who's actually been attacked by one of these things. I sure hope you listen to your mom and decide not to go out looking for one. Believe me when I tell you, you're not ready for it.
No, and I don't think she'll ever be ready for it, because I don't care your age. Nobody, in their right mind at least, nobody wants to see one of these things.
You think you do, but you definitely don't want to see one. After all this happened, who was the first person you told about your encounter?
I actually didn't tell anybody for years and years and years. And it was funny, one of the first people I told was an ex-boyfriend of mine. Well, my first husband, he knew about it. But he never really said if he believed me or not, but it was an ex-boyfriend of mine in between my first and second husband that I had dated. He actually had his own encounter. And when I started to tell him my story, we were talking about the smell. He just interrupted me, and he basically finished what I stated to you earlier. I was blown away. I couldn't believe he had seen one, and that he was telling me that he had seen one. But we kind of compared notes when he told me what he had gone through. He had gone hunting with his best friend and his best friend's dad, and they went down to Georgia. And I don't know where in Georgia, but they had a game lease down there, or his friend's dad did. So they were leasing property down there to hunt on, and they went really early in the morning to get up in their tree stand, and it was before the sun came up, he said. And I don't know how far apart they were, but I remember him saying that they were kind of like on an incline of a hill, and this incline was about as far as, well, he said 3 or 4 football fields if you put them together. So that's, I don't know how much distance that is. That's a lot. But they were far enough apart that they were using walkie-talkies because they were going to radio each other and tell each other where the deer were coming from in case one of them wasn't ready or wasn't prepared. Basically just to help them hunt so somebody could bag something, or maybe they could all three get something. Anyway, he said the first thing that happened in his encounter was, he said they hadn't been there long, and they all had rifles, of course, but his best friend's dad was the one sitting in the tree stand in the middle, he said. And he had a sidearm, a .357 on him. My ex said that he smelled something too, like I said, but he said the first thing that happened was these deer come running out. They were does, and they flew by him underneath the tree stand, and he thought maybe something had spooked them because he could hear something in the forest coming, but he said it sounded huge. And the whole reason that his best friend's dad had a sidearm is they have a lot of wild boar, in Georgia they're having trouble with. And he actually thought maybe it could have been a wild boar because it was making so much racket coming through the trees that he thought, well, it could be a boar. Maybe it spooked the deer. But then he started to smell that smell. And then he said the next thing was this thing come flying by him up that hill. And he said it was on all fours. He said, and it was moving. But he got a pretty good look of it before it got to where he couldn't see it anymore. And he didn't remember a tail either. But he said it was so big, if it had stood, he compared it to the size of a grizzly. Well, no. Yeah, he did compare it to the size of a grizzly. He said it was the size of a grizzly or a beetle-bug car is what he said. And funny he had said it that way and he might have seen the same as me because we're from the same area, but there's a guy around here and he's got a grizzly mounted and he's got a beetle-bug car sitting beside of it to show you that they're literally the same size as the beetle-bug car, and this one was a small grizzly, they said. But he said if it had stopped and reached up, it could have jerked him out of that tree stand. And he said that he was terrified. My ex is about 260, and he's 6'2". He is not scared of anything. He does these tough man contests, but he was terrified. And he tried to radio his best friend's dad, and he was telling him, hey, there's something headed your way. I don't know what the hell it is. And he said his dad started screaming, what the hell is that? And he said before he could pull his .350 sidearm from the holster on his hip, that thing had already cleared the top of the hill and was gone. So it covered that amount of distance in that short of a time period. He said it was literally seconds. But he said it scared them so bad that they all got down and decided they were leaving. And when they went, they wanted to tell the old man that owned the property, though, so they went to tell him what they had seen. And he said that when they approached him, they were like, sir, you've got some type of canine something on your property, and it seems pretty dangerous. He said the old man just acted like he wasn't shocked, and he said, yeah, I know. And he said they were just blown away, but he said this old man just acted like he knew and wanted to know where they had seen it at, and just wasn't shocked at all. He said that they had had reports of it, and he had had several cattle killed, and deers had been killed, and hogs had been killed, and a lot of different things had been killed on his property by this thing that he knew was there, but he didn't offer to mention it to them before they went hunting. So needless to say, they never hunted there again, ever.
Yeah, that's really bad. That guy let them go hunting there without letting them know about that. That's definitely something that you want to know about before you go out there.
Yeah, they definitely should have warned them about that thing.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. You told me about how your ex-husband, was a big-time hunter and he had hunted all over the U.S. After being through what you had gone through, did you feel safe out in the woods with him, or were you still on edge?
I always felt safe with him, but I mean, I can't, but if I can tell you how many times I've gone camping on one hand, and if I go, it always has to be 10 or more people. I will not go in a small group. Like I said, I'll watch my surroundings. I'm very strange about things. He has never seen anything himself, but he believed me, and he believed me so much that he actually had me a silver bullet made. Not that we believe that it's that type of, quote, werewolf. We don't believe it's a man that turns into a wolf back to a man. And he did it to be sweet. We were trying to figure out a way to put it on a necklace. He wanted me to be able to put it on a necklace, but then be able to use it if I ever had to. We never could figure out how to do that. Yeah, he had that made for me, but I did feel safe with him, but he agreed that even though he had never encountered anything, he's heard stuff, and he smelled stuff that he's wondered. He thinks that the possibility of things being out there we don't know of that could definitely be true.
Well, I'm glad at least he had an open mind. That's good news.
Yeah. He was the one that encouraged me to write about this to help me. So he's a really good guy. We're really close. We have a child together, and we're close, very close to each other.
He does sound like a really good guy, and I'm sure he did help you a lot through the process. Thank goodness. You used to live alone way out in the sticks, and on your property you kept horses. From time to time they would get unsettled, and when that would happen, instead of you going out to check on them, you would have family and friends come over. Please tell us about that and why you would have them check on the horses. I'm sure it goes without saying why, but I want to give you a chance in your own words to talk about that.
Well, now my own horses, we never had nothing happen, but when they got unsettled, I lived up going towards Asheville, and that's the mountain area around here. No, after my encounter, there is no way I was going to go out there, especially nighttime, and check on my animals. As much as I love my animals, I wouldn't go check on them by myself. I would call somebody and have them come over, and we would go check. And we didn't have horses, but my ex, and you might have been getting them confused, because like I said, when I lived by myself, nothing happened, but in 2012, we had an incident. My ex that I am now separated from, he was in Virginia, and he had some people that had some horses on his property that they were keeping there, and the horses kept getting out, and we wondered what was spooking them, and we had an incident there that might be what you're talking about. I'm not sure.
No, I was talking about where I think you lived in the middle of nowhere in North Carolina, and every once in a while your horses would be disturbed, and when they would be disturbed, you said you would call friends over, and I think family too, to help round up the horses. I was wondering when you were telling me about that if you ever did share with them why you weren't comfortable going out there on your own to do that.
Oh, no. When my horses would get upset, you're talking about, I told you that we had a bear up there. When my horses would get upset, I wouldn't go check on them because of what happened to me. But I never told them why I was that way. I just made it always seem like I didn't want to go out there because at the time there was a black bear that was roaming about. So I just always blamed it on the bear, but I never ever would tell them why for fear that they would laugh at me or call me crazy.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that does make good sense. You talked about the 2012 incident. I'm not sure if it's the incident I have in mind or not. I'm thinking about the incident that happened in the Pine Grove with the eye shine. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's the incident. My youngest child's dad lives in Virginia, and it's right across the line, and he lives right on the Blue Ridge Parkway, or right off of the Blue Ridge Parkway. They have like 60 acres up there, and we were sitting one night. He likes to ride around his land at night. We were sitting in the car one night talking. We'd been riding around some of the fields. He was getting tired, and it was raining, and he had leaned his seat back, and when it's dark like that, I start getting nervous anyway, and I was trying to get him just to go on home. Let's just go home. He likes listening to the rain when it's raining like it was that night. But over in these pine trees, I started noticing some eye shine, and I started getting really nervous about it. And I mentioned it to him and was like, Justin, look, and he was like, it was far enough down to the ground, though, that it could have been, just an animal, a deer, or it was probably 3 foot off the ground. So it could have been a deer or a dog or a coyote or anything, even a bear, because they have a lot of bears up there. He was like, oh, it's probably a coyote or something. Don't worry about it. Well, a few minutes later, I noticed that the eye shine was now in a different position. And that position was about 7 feet up in the air. And I freaked. And I was so scared. I was on the phone with my daughter at the time, talking on my cell phone. And she was like, Mom, just crank the car up. Because she knew at that point, what had happened to me. She was like, Mom, just crank the car up and get out of there. Because, of course, I start thinking, dog man. Justin was teasing me and stuff about it. And he was like, it's probably an owl. And he flew up higher. And I've never heard of an owl doing that. But needless to say, we left. Because I just had that eerie gut feeling that just something wasn't right anyway. And I've always taught my children, please listen to your gut, because when you start having bad feelings, it's usually for a good reason. We left, and it was maybe a month later, the people down the road were keeping some horses on his property, and they kept getting out, and they were getting spooked by something, and they got out again one night, and we went to put them up, and I followed Justin down, and we were in the truck, and he put them up, and then we had to go on down and turn around and come back up. And when we did this, something crossed the road and went our way back up. We were both looking at each other like, did you see that? We both saw it, and it had ducked into the pine grove, because even though this was at a different, it was still on his land, but it was like across the ridge. It was probably a mile from where we had seen the eye shine that time, but it was still on the same property, and all those woods right through there connect together. Well, he started slowing down right where it crossed, and he started teasing me about werewolves and Sasquatch, because he's a non-believer. Well, he was. We slowed down through there, and he was teasing me, and then all of a sudden there was this loud, something hit the back of the car and like scraped it, and we heard it. And he floored it. We got the heck out of there. That really scared him. But it was like right when we got past where that thing had crossed in front of us, that's when something hit the back of the truck. Yeah, that was weird. We didn't stick around to see what it was. Of course, me, I'm thinking Dogman, and he's thinking more, he didn't really know what to think of it. He laughed about it when we got back to the house, like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal, and he started making up all kinds of excuses, but he was scared, trust me, at that moment. But then it was about a year later, well, no, it wasn't a year later. It was the next year in 2013, it was months later. I was pregnant with our daughter, and I was up one night, and it was around 3 o'clock in the morning. I was making me a sandwich because I was getting bigger in pregnancy, and I was tired and aggravated and ill, and I got up to get me something to eat and drink, and all of a sudden there was this horrible, horrible howl, and it scared me so bad I just froze. I mean, I literally just started panicking immediately and froze in my tracks, and I was so scared that when I was able to move again, which was a few minutes, I sent him a text saying I heard this long howl at this time in the morning because I wanted the timestamp as to what time it was. And of course, he got up the next day and he gave me grief about it and stuff. But 2 days later, some people that live in the area, these old men, supposedly saw something crossing the road that they thought was Sasquatch. And he come home 2 days later telling me that story, and his eyes were really big. So it was funny because what it sounded like, what I thought I heard that night sounded like I don't know. It's a howl on one of the Sasquatch recordings, and I can't remember where it's from. But when I hear it, I know it. But they say one of the best audios of Sasquatch ever. But it's real long and drawn out and real kind of sorrowful. But yeah, that was what happened.
I'm pretty sure you're talking about what's called the Ohio Howler.
Well, you would know probably better than me, and when we get off here, I'm definitely going to look that up and see if it's it. It probably is, but I know it, when you hear it, you don't forget it. But that's what I thought I heard that night. But I don't know. There is Sasquatch seen up there where he lives fairly often. So it could have been that, but I don't live there anymore.
With all that activity going on around there, I can't say I blame you, and it sure sounds to me like old Justin became a believer after that happening to him.
Yeah, he's had a couple of things happen since then that he's not so quick to laugh at it anymore. He still doesn't really believe in Dogman, but he's kind of changed his opinion on Sasquatch. So, yeah, I think he's kind of become a believer.
That would make you a believer. Not too long ago, you found out about those 2 episodes of Paranormal Witness. The one episode's called Wolfpack, and the other episode's called The Cabin. It freaked you out when you saw those episodes, but it also kind of gave you a sense of relief. Let's talk about that if you don't mind.
Yeah, the first one I remember watching was back when I was pregnant with Bristol, my little girl, was in 2013, and that was the one on Wolfpack. And I was just so shocked that there was somebody else out there that was coming forward and putting it on a television show saying that they had seen basically what I saw. But what freaked me out about it was the fact that it was a pack, because I had in my head that the one I encountered was a loner and that these things were loners. So you can imagine how panic-stricken I was when they said there were 6 of those things standing in that man's pasture. I come unglued. So unglued that I had my daughter and Justin watch Paranormal Witness because I was like, you've got to see this. And I felt just so bad for that couple because, in my opinion, they definitely had that happen to them. And I can't imagine. That had to be, oh Lord, that had to be terrifying. Just absolutely terrifying. I mean, God, 1 enough is bad enough, but 6? Good grief, I can't imagine. And then the other one was the cabin, and what freaked me out about that, though, was that the police were involved, and none of them would say it, but he pretty much says it at the end. They wouldn't say it, but when they saw that this man's cabin, inside of it had a room where he had been chaining himself down, and he had collected a lot of silver he had put into a jar, and there was deep claw marks all inside the room where he had been chaining himself down, and it smelled like an animal's den, they said. And he said none of them would say it, but they were all thinking werewolf, that the man was a werewolf. And that just threw me off guard because, like I said, I know these things exist because I saw one. But I always looked at it as it's an animal, something natural born. And when I saw that, because I truly believe those people, and I don't see the police lying about something like that. I'll put it to you this way. Seeing one is one level, but then when you talk about somebody being able to actually transform into one of these things and then transform back to a human, oh my God, that takes it to a whole different level. You know, I don't even know where to begin to try to understand that. I don't even know where to begin. So, yeah, I was very, very, very freaked out about that. And to this day, I'm freaked out about it because I guess I just keep thinking, Lord, I hope that's not true. But undoubtedly, if you watch Paranormal Witness, or if you haven't watched it, go watch that episode, The Cabin, and tell me what you think then. It definitely kind of, for me, threw a wrench in everything I thought I was beginning to understand. Because once you go through this, for me, I want to learn everything I can about them, but it's almost like the more I learn about them, the more questions I have. So, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to go through this and then try to figure out what you've seen. And for years, I know with me, I won't lie. I thought, okay, well, maybe I imagined the door handle lifting, and maybe it wasn't as bad as what my memory recalls. And it took a long time for me to just start admitting, even to myself, that no, I know what I saw. And then you just have to admit it. And for me, I just finally said, you know what? I know what I saw. I saw what I saw. Can't change it. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but I'm not lying. I know they exist. But it's just really, really hard to wrap your mind around it. And for me, it's even harder to think of these things being human and then turning into an animal and then turning back into a human. That just really blows my mind. I don't even know where to begin with anything like that. But it's just hard to deal with. It's hard.
Oh, yeah, it's very hard to deal with. I've got to tell you, after hearing the details of your encounter, I am just blown away that you are dealing with it so well.
Well, like I said, Vic, there's days that I don't deal with it too well. There's days I break down and cry, even to this day, over it. Sometimes you, like I said, you look back and I know what I saw, but there are times you think, well, maybe I am crazy. Even though, I mean, I know I'm not, but it's just hard. It's hard to know that they're out there. And since listening to your show, I've realized that undoubtedly there's a lot more out there than I figured. Like I said, I was never naive enough to think that I was the only one who probably went through this, but I kind of figured the one around here had either died off by now or hopefully moved on elsewhere because we've had so much growth around here. But listening to the people on your show, these things, they're not limited to just the country or the mountains. They could very easily pop up within rural areas in the city, and that's scary. That really freaks me out.
Oh yeah, they sure can and do pop up in the city. You never know when they might pop up or be. I've heard people talk about seeing them crawling into vacant buildings in the middle of the night in the city. I don't think we're talking about downtown Manhattan here, but supposedly they have been seen crawling through broken out windows and vacant homes in the middle of the night. That's a pretty unnerving thought right there.
Yeah, that golly, you tell me that now, I'm really going to be freaked out. Every building I go by from now on that I know is empty or vacant, I'm going to be thinking, oh God, wonder what's hiding in there at night.
Oh no, sorry about that. Well, knowledge is power, but sometimes when you know things like that, it sure doesn't make you feel better, that's for sure.
No, but then again, like you said, knowledge is power, and I'm glad you have your show and at least you're putting the word out there, because if anything, I hope people can protect themselves and their families from these things, because they are highly intelligent. And I know when I told you my story in letter form, I told you I feel like they're a top of the food chain alpha predator, and I really do feel that way. I'll put it to you this way. Knowing they're out there, we have been knocked down on the food chain by several notches. There's no rhyme and reason why people like me have been able to walk away from these things. I think pure luck. And I'm telling you right now, the one I saw, though, if it could have gotten to Jill and me, it would have killed us. And the way it was looking at me, it was just like, if I could get to you, you know what I would do to you. That's why I really hope my daughter, her friends, and anybody else out there wanting to go look for this thing, please don't do it. Just don't. Listen to Vic's show. Get your kicks and thrills and scares from the show and leave the actual animal itself alone, because somebody could easily get killed.
Oh, that's true. Those are good words. Most encounters obviously end with the dogman going its way and the eyewitness going the other direction, but like you said, unfortunately, I've got almost no doubt that if it had been able to gain entry into that car, it wouldn't have ended well for either one of you.
No, I know it wouldn't have. I mean, I was there that night, and I'm telling you, it wanted in the car really bad, and that's why I'm glad it didn't break the window, but it could have. I mean, it was definitely powerful enough that it could have broken that window, no problem.
We didn't talk about Barry's good friend who had that strange activity going on around their house that night. From what I understand, this friend lives near Morgantown?
Yeah, Morganton. He was my neighbor where I lived. He become good friends with my ex, Barry. He was the one that went on that hunting trip to Georgia. But, yeah, that's what bothers. Another reason why I still own that property, but I'm selling it. I don't live there no more. He had something that one night, because he was there when we were when Barry admitted to me what he had seen. And Michael, his name's Michael said, oh my God, I can't believe y'all are talking about this. Because at first he had thought what he encountered was a Sasquatch. And there was a smell that night, but he lives up the road from where my place was. And he said one night they had a bonfire going and something come up out of the tree line. And now up there it's heavily, heavily wooded. I mean, it's so heavily wooded you can't see like through the trees very far, but they heard something huge come up and they didn't know what it was. At first they thought it was a bear, but they didn't see a bear, and it was making all these sounds. He said it was making this weird breathing sound, and he said they all wound up basically hiding in the house because it was like the thing got mad and just tore up the wood line back there. And he said you could hear this thing just trashing stuff, just like, I don't know, he said like a Tasmanian devil, like the little cartoon character. He said he really thought that, like it's just going in a circle, just destroying everything. He said you could just hear it just slamming trees and shaking the trees and where trees had broken and slamming them around and throwing stuff and making all these growls. And he said it was horrifying. And he said they all moved into the house and basically barricaded themselves in. Nothing else happened. It stayed out in that tree line. But he said the next morning when it was over, he went out there to see, and he said sure enough, it had just tore up that tree line. Listening to some of the people on your show and then reading stuff on the internet, there's been several people that's encountered dogmen, and it seems like they tear stuff up. And at the time, he thought it was a Sasquatch, but now that I've heard all this, I'm kind of wondering if it wasn't a dogman and not Sasquatch. I don't know that Sasquatch would get that angry. To me, I mean, I've never had a Sasquatch encounter, but to me, Bigfoot seems more tolerant than dogmen. I don't think dogmen are very tolerant.
Sasquatch do seem to be more tolerant, much more so than dogmen, but from time to time they seem to have their moments where they have tirades like that, so it very well could have been a Sasquatch that did that. Since we didn't see what did that, we'll never know, but it could have gone either way. It had to be one heck of a long night for them, though, having to be in the house and listen to all that go on.
Yeah, he said it went on for a long time, too. I mean, it was like all night this thing did that. He said it tore it up for a real long time, and then it'd get really quiet, and then it would, like, take another fit. So, I don't know. But, like I said, that's another reason I'm selling my property up there.
Before we get out of here, Danielle, one last question I wanted to throw at you. After you had that encounter back in '87, did you ever hear about anyone else reporting a dogman encounter from that area?
No, not at that time. Now, at that time, the lizard man was going on in South Carolina. And, you know, I remember hearing about lizard man and actually scoffing at it myself and laughing. And then I had what happened to me. And then I thought, okay, maybe they are seeing something down there in South Carolina. And the only other thing that I can think of that was going on around here is like I said, there was people losing cattle by something but people were thinking it was just a dog pack, and there had been a Sasquatch reported. I remember there was a write-up in the newspaper or something at that time on a Sasquatch in the area that someone, well, I think it was actually several people had thought they had seen it. But now, I mean, not now, even back then after my encounter, I wondered if it was Sasquatch or what I saw. It could have been what I saw and not a Sasquatch.
It sure makes you wonder. Well, having said that, Danielle, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
No, just like I said, to your listeners, believe me, don't believe me. You know, you should take everything with a grain of salt, but I promise y'all I am telling the truth. I swear it on my mother's grave, and I'm telling you right now, these things are real. They are out there, but please don't go looking for them. Leave them alone because they are deadly. This thing is a killer. When I was looking into that thing's eyes, I knew I was looking into the eyes of a killer. And considering I was so close that I was seeing this thing was scarred up, I know these things have the capability to fight, the tools to fight. I was very up close and personal with it, and please don't go looking for it. Just leave it alone. Just leave it alone and pray that you never, ever, ever encounter one, because I would not wish this on my worst enemy.
Very well said. Danielle, I can't tell you how sorry I am to hear about you having to go through that. About the only solace I can bring to what happened is the fact that you are dealing with it so well. Of course, it's not easy. It was such a difficult thing to live through. How could it be easy to deal with? But, like I said, you are dealing with this very well, and that I'm very glad to see. Thank you so much for coming on this show and sharing all those details with us. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Vic.
Oh, thanks again so much for being here. Well, have yourself a great night, okay?
Okay, you too, and thank you.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.